I never imagined that the brother who spent his entire life tearing me down would one day destroy my marriage, shatter my identity as a father, and still somehow believe I'd forgive him like I always had. My name is Ethan Cole, and for as long as I can remember, I was the invisible child in my own family, not neglected in the obvious sense, not abused in ways people would easily recognize, but quietly overlooked, constantly overshadowed by my younger brother Ryan, who, for reasons I never fully understood, could do no wrong in the eyes of our mother. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal family, but inside those walls, everything revolved around him. Mother would cook his meals, clean up after him, and even ask me to help him with his homework while never once offering the same support when I struggled. I learned early on that if I wanted something done, I had to do it myself. Ryan, on the other hand, grew up believing the world owed him everything. He was loud, confident, and reckless, so much like father in personality, yet without any of his discipline, while I buried myself in books and tried to stay out of trouble. Ryan found entertainment in making my life miserable. He mocked me for wearing glasses, for being quiet, for not fitting into his idea of what a real man should be. He would sneak into my room, read my diary, then twist my private thoughts into something humiliating just to get a reaction out of me. When I complained, Mother would laugh it off and say, "That's just how brothers bond," as if humiliation and invasion of privacy were somehow acts of affection. It didn't stop there. Ryan pushed boundaries in ways that still make my stomach turn when I think about them. He once nearly broke my glasses during a fight. Another time, he put stones in my cereal. And when I confronted him, he just laughed. I told Mother, hoping for some kind of intervention, but she dismissed it like it was nothing. "You're too sensitive," she would say, as if I was the problem for not finding it funny. The worst part wasn't even what he did at home. It was what he did outside. We went to the same school. And Ryan knew I was being bullied. Yet instead of helping me, he joined them. He called me names, encouraged them, and once even told me I should kill myself. That moment stayed with me longer than anything else, because it wasn't just cruelty. It was something deeper, something that made me question my own worth. Father was mostly absent during those years, busy working, unaware of how bad things had gotten. Mother never told him, and I didn't think it would matter anyway. But everything changed one day when Ryan crossed a line even she couldn't ignore, or at least couldn't defend convincingly anymore. He tried to burn my hair with a lighter, laughing like it was a joke. When I reacted, Mother still attempted to brush it off, but this time Father stepped in. I still remember the way his voice changed when he said, "Enough is enough." It was the first time I had ever seen him truly angry at Ryan, and for the first time in my life, someone was actually on my side. Later that night, Father came into my room and sat down beside me. He didn't say much at first, just looked at me like he was finally seeing me clearly. Then he admitted something I never expected, that he had been waiting for Ryan to grow out of his behavior, hoping it was just immaturity. But now he realized it had gone too far. That was when I told him everything, not just about Ryan, but about the bullying at school, the constant fear, the feeling of being alone even in my own home. I think that was the moment everything shifted, not just for me, but for him too. The next day, Father went to my school and spoke to the principal, making sure the bullying stopped. Then he enrolled me in mixed martial arts classes and told me, "You need to learn to stand up for yourself." At first, I felt out of place, like I didn't belong in that environment, but I threw myself into it the same way I did with everything else in my life, with focus and determination. Over time, it changed me, not just physically, but mentally. I became stronger, more confident, and for the first time, I stopped seeing myself as someone who had to endure everything in silence. That change didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, I caught Ryan stealing the money I had been saving from doing chores. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, "What are you going to do? Run to Dad." Something in me snapped. Before I even realized it, I had punched him, hard enough to knock him to the ground. I took my money back and stood over him, feeling something I had never felt before: control. When Mother rushed out and started scolding me, Father stepped in again, asking for the truth. When he heard what really happened, he looked at Ryan and said, "You're lucky that's all he did." From that day on, something changed between us. Ryan stopped physically bullying me, not because he had learned his lesson, but because he finally realized I wasn't an easy target anymore, for the first time in our lives. We were on equal footing, or at least that's what I thought. What I didn't realize back then was that Ryan wasn't the kind of person who stops when he loses control. He was the kind who waits, adapts, and finds new ways to hurt you when you least expect it. As we grew older, the tension between Ryan and me didn't disappear. It simply changed shape, becoming quieter but far more toxic, like something festering beneath the surface that neither of us acknowledged out loud. He no longer hit me or pulled childish pranks, but his words became sharper, more calculated, always delivered when no one else was around. If I tried to talk to him, he would ignore me completely, walking past me as if I didn't exist, then mutter something under his breath like loser or waste of space. It was subtle enough that I couldn't prove anything, but constant enough to wear me down. What made it worse was Mother's continued refusal to intervene. Whenever I asked her why Ryan treated me that way, she would sigh and say, "Just be the bigger person, Ethan," as if maturity meant tolerating disrespect indefinitely. Eventually, I stopped trying. I stopped expecting anything from him, from her, from the idea that things would ever improve. The only thing I focused on was getting out. School became my escape, my future became my motivation, and when I earned a scholarship to my dream university, it felt like the first real victory of my life. Father threw me a small party before I left, and even Mother seemed proud, though there was still a distance in her eyes I couldn't quite explain. Ryan barely acknowledged it at all. He stood there, arms crossed, like my success was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. Leaving home was the most freeing moment I had ever experienced. For the first time, I could breathe without constantly anticipating conflict. University life opened up a world I had never known, friendships that felt genuine, classes that excited me, and a sense of peace that I didn't realize I had been missing. It was during my second year that I met Lily Carter. A mutual friend introduced us at a party, and from the moment we started talking, everything felt effortless. She was warm, engaging, and made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before. For someone like me, who had grown up feeling invisible, that meant everything. We started dating soon after, and for a while, life felt almost perfect. Lily became my anchor, my safe place, the person I believed I would spend the rest of my life with. When we found out she was pregnant in our final year, it was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Coming from a traditional background, I knew what had to be done, and I didn't hesitate. We got married shortly after graduation in a small ceremony surrounded by our families. I remember standing there, looking at her, thinking that despite everything I had gone through, I had finally found happiness. But happiness, as I would later learn, is not always what it seems. Our early years of marriage were stable, even joyful at times, but cracks began to form sooner than I wanted to admit. The first time I discovered Lily had been unfaithful, it felt like a punch to the gut. It was an ongoing affair with a coworker, something that had lasted far longer than I could comprehend. I remember confronting her, my voice shaking as I asked, why, and she broke down, apologizing, promising it meant nothing, that it was a mistake. I should have walked away then, but I didn't. I told myself we were young, that people make mistakes, that I didn't want my child growing up in a broken home. So I forgave her. Years later, it happened again, this time with an old boyfriend from her hometown. The pain was just as sharp, if not sharper, because now it wasn't a mistake, it was a pattern. Again, I chose to stay. Looking back, I know how that sounds, how weak it must seem. But at the time, I believed I was doing the right thing. I believed in second chances, in commitment, in the idea that love meant enduring hardships and coming out stronger on the other side. For a while, it seemed like I was right. Lily appeared to change, to settle into our life together. And for nearly 4 years, things were peaceful, not perfect, but stable enough that I convinced myself we had moved past everything. Then, 3 months ago, everything fell apart in a way I could never have prepared for. Lily sat me down one evening, her expression distant, almost detached, and said she needed to tell me something. There was no emotion in her voice, no hesitation, just a cold calmness that immediately made my stomach drop. She admitted she had been seeing someone again, not recently, but for a long time. And then she said something that made the world around me feel like it was collapsing. She told me that our son, Noah, might not be mine. I remember staring at her, trying to process what she had just said, my mind refusing to accept it. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She avoided my eyes at first, then finally said it, quietly but clearly. "It's Ryan." For a moment, everything went silent. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. My brother, the same person who had spent my entire life tearing me down, had now crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I asked her to explain, though part of me didn't want to hear it, and she told me everything. How it started years ago, how they grew close when she visited my family, how one thing led to another. She described it like it was something that just happened, something inevitable, as if betrayal on that scale could ever be accidental. What hurt the most wasn't just the act itself. It was the realization that this had been going on behind my back for years. The lies, the secrecy, the fact that every time she told me she was working late or traveling for business, she might have been with him. When I asked her why she stayed with me, she said something that cut deeper than anything else. "Because you were the stable one." In that moment, I understood everything. I wasn't her choice. I was her safety net. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, and I didn't beg her to stay. Instead, I felt something inside me go completely still, like a switch had been flipped and all the emotion I should have felt was replaced by cold clarity. I remember looking at Lily and saying quietly, "Thank you for finally telling me the truth." And that seemed to confuse her more than anything else. She started crying almost immediately, her voice shaking as she said, "Aren't you going to fight for us?" But I had nothing left in me to fight with. I walked past her, opened the closet, and began packing a suitcase. She followed me, growing more desperate, saying things like, "People make mistakes. Ethan, marriages go through things." And when I didn't respond, she shifted tactics. bringing up Noah, telling me, think about our son. He needs you. But I stopped folding my clothes for a moment and said, I might not even be his father. And the silence that followed was heavier than anything she had said before. She accused me of being cruel, of abandoning a child I had raised since birth. But I couldn't explain to her what it felt like in that moment. The way every memory I had with Noah suddenly felt uncertain, like something fragile that could shatter if I looked at it too closely. I didn't hate the boy, not even for a second, but I knew that if I stayed, I would never be able to separate him from the betrayal that created him. And more than that, I knew that staying would mean keeping Lily in my life, and I simply couldn't do that anymore, without another word. I zipped up my suitcase, walked past her as she stood crying in the doorway, and left the house that had once felt like everything I had built for myself. The next morning, after a sleepless night in a hotel, I drove straight to my parents' house. My hands were still shaking slightly as I knocked on the door, and when Mother opened it, she immediately sensed something was wrong. I didn't ease into it, didn't soften the blow. I just told them everything, from Lily's confession to the years-long affair with Ryan. At first, Mother reacted exactly how I expected, shaking her head and saying, "That's not possible. Ryan would never do something like that." Her voice filled with denial, but I had already anticipated that response. I asked them both to stay quiet and let me make a call. I dialed Ryan's number and put the phone on speaker, my heart pounding as it rang. When he picked up, his tone was casual, almost amused, as if nothing in the world could touch him. I didn't waste time and said, "I know about you and Lily," and for a brief second, there was silence on the other end before he laughed it off, saying, "What are you talking about?" I told him Lily had confessed, and his tone shifted slightly, becoming defensive, then dismissive. He started blaming her, calling her names, saying it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, even going as far as to say, "Maybe she just realized you're not enough." Hearing that, something inside me hardened even further, but I kept my voice steady and said, "I'm going to tell everyone," and he scoffed, replying, "Who's going to believe you? I'm still the favorite. Remember?" That was the moment I knew he had no idea what was coming. I let him continue talking just long enough to confirm everything, then said, "You've said enough," and that was when Mother finally spoke, her voice trembling as she said his name. The shift on the other end of the line was immediate. Ryan went silent, then started stammering, trying to backtrack, to explain, to twist the narrative into something that made him look less guilty. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no way to put it back. Father took the phone from me then, and I watched as his expression darkened in a way I had never seen before. His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it that made every word feel final as he said, "What you've done is unforgivable." And then he laid it all out. How Ryan had betrayed not just me, but the entire family. How he had destroyed any trust that remained. Ryan tried to interrupt, to justify himself, but Father didn't let him, cutting him off and saying, "From this moment on, you are on your own." He told him that he would no longer fund his education, no longer support his lifestyle, and that whatever happened next would be the result of his own choices. When the call ended, the house was completely silent. Mother stood there, tears in her eyes, her entire world seemingly shaken. While I felt something unexpected, not joy, not even satisfaction, but a quiet sense of closure. For years, I had been the one who suffered in silence while Ryan got away with everything. And now, for the first time, he was facing consequences he couldn't escape. Mother walked over to me slowly and wrapped her arms around me, apologizing over and over again. And in that moment, I realized something I never thought I would feel, that I had finally been seen, truly seen, by her. But even as that chapter closed, I knew the fallout was far from over. The weeks that followed felt like I was living someone else's life, moving through the motions while everything around me rearranged itself into something unfamiliar, yet strangely inevitable. With Father's help, I hired a lawyer and began the divorce process immediately. And unlike the hesitation I had shown in the past, this time there was no doubt, no second guessing, no emotional tug pulling me back. Lily, however, did not make it easy. She and her lawyer tried to twist the situation in her favor, even going as far as to request alimony, arguing that I earned more and that she had become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Hearing that almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it felt after everything she had done. Fortunately, the truth worked in my favor, and once her affair was brought into the legal proceedings, her position quickly weakened. The hardest part, though, wasn't the legal battle, it was the paternity test, even though I already knew the answer deep down. Seeing it confirmed in black and white felt like a second betrayal layered on top of the first. Noah was not my son, he was Ryan's. I remember sitting there, holding the results, my hands trembling as the weight of it settled in. Every birthday, every bedtime story, every moment I had spent believing I was his father suddenly felt like a lie I had been living without knowing. It wasn't Noah's fault, not in any way, but the connection I thought we shared was shattered beyond repair. Lily begged me to stay involved in his life, telling me, "He still sees you as his father," but I couldn't do it, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and I knew that seeing him would only reopen wounds that hadn't even begun to heal. Once the divorce was finalized, I moved into a small bachelor apartment. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was mine. and for the first time since I had left for university, I was completely on my own again. There was a strange sense of peace in that solitude, a quiet that didn't feel oppressive, but freeing. I rebuilt my routine, focused on my work, and slowly started putting myself back together piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when everything came crashing back, but I kept moving forward because I knew there was no other direction left to go. Then, about 2 weeks after everything had settled, Father called me with something I hadn't expected. He told me he had been thinking about changing his will. His voice was steady, but I could hear the finality in it as he explained that he didn't want Ryan to inherit anything after what he had done. He said, "I won't reward betrayal," and then told me that he intended to leave everything to me. When he mentioned the total value, close to $2 million, including assets, savings, and insurance, I was stunned into silence. It wasn't the money itself that shocked me, it was what it represented. A complete reversal of everything I had grown up believing about my place in the family. He explained that Mother would still be allowed to live in the house for the rest of her life if anything happened to him, and I agreed immediately without hesitation. No matter what had happened in the past, she was still my mother, and I would never turn my back on her like that. But the fact that Father was willing to entrust everything to me, to make me the sole heir, was something I never thought I would experience. It felt less like a reward and more like an acknowledgement, a correction of years where I had been overlooked. Somehow, Ryan found out about the will. I later learned that Mother had told him, unable to completely cut him off despite everything. And that's when he finally decided to reach out to me. It was the first time he had contacted me since everything had been exposed. And when I saw his name on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. The moment I picked up, I could hear it in his voice. Desperation, something I had never associated with him before. He told me he was struggling, that without Father's support he couldn't keep up with his college fees, that he had been searching for part-time work but hadn't found anything stable. Then he mentioned Lily, how she was pressuring him for child support now that the truth was out, and how everything was falling apart for him. He said, "I know I messed up, but we're brothers. We can fix this." And for a brief moment, I almost didn't recognize the person speaking. This was the same person who had once laughed at my pain, who had told me I wasn't enough, who had slept with my wife without a second thought. I let him finish. Then I laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief, and said, "You should have thought about all of that before you did what you did." He tried to argue, saying Lily was also to blame, and I told him, "I know, and I dealt with her. Now she's your responsibility." When I reminded him that he was no longer the golden child, that he was now the one everyone looked down on, his voice broke, and for the first time in my life, I heard him cry. It caught me off guard, not because I felt sympathy, but because it was something I had never seen before. He said everyone had turned against him, that even relatives were judging him, and I realized that for the first time. He was experiencing a fraction of what he had put me through for years. Still, I didn't soften. I told him, "We're done. Don't call me again," and ended the call. But even after that, his voice stayed with me, echoing in my mind in ways I didn't expect. Me was slowly beginning to stabilize in ways I hadn't expected. My relationship with Father had grown stronger than ever, almost like we were making up for lost time. Every weekend, we would go golfing together, something we had never done when I was younger. And those moments felt less like a father guiding his son and more like two men learning to understand each other. Mother, on the other hand, was quieter. I could tell she was still struggling internally, caught between the guilt of her past favoritism and the pain of cutting Ryan out of her life. She never spoke about him directly, and neither did I. But there was an unspoken understanding between us that some wounds were too deep to reopen casually. One evening, I did confront her about how Ryan had found out about the will, and she broke down almost immediately, admitting that she had told him because she couldn't bear the thought of him having nothing left. She said, "I thought maybe he had learned his lesson," and I could see the conflict in her eyes, the part of her that still wanted to protect him battling against the reality of what he had done. Father, however, was unwavering. When he heard what she had done, he told her firmly that if she continued to communicate with Ryan behind his back, their marriage would not survive it. It was a harsh line to draw, but it made one thing very clear, even to her, that there would be no going back to the way things were. Months passed, and with time, the distance between me and everything that had happened began to feel more manageable. I focused on my career and was eventually promoted, something that brought a quiet sense of pride and stability back into my life. I also started therapy, not because I thought something was wrong with me, but because I knew I had been carrying too much for too long. Talking through everything, from my childhood to my marriage, helped me understand patterns I had never questioned before, especially the way I had learned to tolerate things I never should have accepted in the first place. Through a cousin named Daniel, I occasionally heard updates about Ryan, though I never asked for them. Apparently, things had not improved for him. Without financial support, he had been forced to drop out of college, unable to keep up with the tuition fees, and had taken a job as a part-time mechanic just to get by. He and Lily were now living together, raising Noah as a family, which, in a strange way, felt like the outcome they had chosen all along. I didn't feel anger when I heard that, not anymore, just a distant acknowledgement that they were now living with the consequences of their actions, just as I was living with mine. As for Noah, I still couldn't bring myself to see him. Some people might call that selfish or cruel, and maybe there's some truth to that, but I know my limits. I know that healing requires distance, and that forcing myself into a situation I'm not ready for would only do more harm than good. Maybe one day, when enough time has passed, I'll be able to face that part of my life again. But for now, I've chosen to let it go, not out of indifference, but out of self-preservation. Looking back on everything, I've come to understand that the hardest part of my journey wasn't the betrayal itself, but the years of conditioning that made me believe Ian had to endure it. I grew up thinking that love meant tolerance, that family meant sacrifice without limits, and that forgiveness was always the right choice no matter the cost. But the truth is, there are lines that, once crossed, change everything. There are actions that don't just hurt you, they redefine your relationship with the people who commit them. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness. It's an act of survival. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you finally cared enough about yourself to stop accepting less than you deserve. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're constantly being hurt by the people who are supposed to love you, I hope this story reminds you that you don't have to stay. You don't have to keep forgiving just because you've done it before, and you don't owe anyone access to your life at the cost of your peace. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear how you would have handled a situation like this.